right. Here goes nothing.
Here we go. So we are sitting down with Tony Russell for a long-awaited return to Wrestling with History.
Yep.
And last night was the 30th anniversary of Monday Night Raw, and they had a big 3-hour show that they had put together. But before we get into that, I can remember as a kid watching primetime wrestling regularly with Monsoon, Heenan, Piper. I remember seeing that show, and I actually do remember Gorilla Monsoon saying that, like on the last episode, he said, next week we have something new for you. Like I remember hearing that, and I was like, oh no, we're not, like, I'm not going to have this wrestling show to watch anymore, you know, and I was maybe 10 at the time. So, and then I remember the very early days of Monday Night Raw. Not well, but I do remember that transition.
Yeah, I'm a little different in the aspect of I did watch primetime wrestling a few times, but it was like I didn't, I had a strict bedtime when I was a kid. So, and I was a little kid, much like yourself back then. So it was, like if I caught it like on school vacations and stuff, like, and my mom would allow me to stay up, or I would be sleeping out, like say at my grandmother's house. I would be able to stay up and watch it, but otherwise I never caught it on the regular. To me, it was basically like it was all like can matches. I know that much. And so it was like, for me watching it, it was like watching a giant wrestling challenge, only with different like commentary teams in the middle, meaning like you had this like I remember towards the end you had like a round table of guys with Vince at the head.
Yeah.
So you had like Hacksaw, Hillbilly Jim, Bobby Heenan, like they had all the heels and the babyface representatives represented towards the end. Now, of course, being the fan, I went back and I watched everything, like you were just saying, with Monsoon, Heenan, and Piper, which that was probably around 89 time period, 90 time period. So when Piper came back, and those are great episodes.
When exactly did primetime wrestling evolve into Monday Night Raw?
1993. It was actually it was the end of 92 was when primetime pretty much ended. Beginning of 93. Because the first Raw premiered in January of 1993. It was January 11th, 1993 to be exact. And that's when, they did the whole, like, they really pumped the campaign hard by saying, new show and it's uncooked, uncensored and raw. Yeah. So they were really, really hitting that raw thing, and yeah. For some bizarre reason, I remember they did an angle where Bobby Heenan wasn't allowed in the building, like maybe to mess up the whole occasion. I don't know, but they had him like do all these different things where he was dressing up either as like a rabbi at one point, a woman at one point, to try to get in. And Sean Mooney would foil him like the entire time because yes, Sean Mooney was on those early Monday Night Raws, kind of a carryover from primetime. So.
Yeah.
Not my favorite commentator back then. He was a little, he was a little bland. Lord Alfred Hayes was no better, but at least Lord Alfred Hayes had the accent. Mooney, I felt, was really boring back then. Back then, of course. Now, a different set of eyes. It's different, but back then I was like, ugh, get this guy out of here, But they had Rob Bartlett on there on the first episode, who
of Raw.
Yeah, Rob Bartlett, who is like a radio guy out of New York, apparently. And apparently he had a name in New York, but, I didn't know who the heck he was. And, I don't think the general audience did either. So,
well, and the first Monday night Raws were based around like New England, New York, if I remember correctly. Like it wasn't like a set place like the ECW arena or anything, but they were local to New York, right?
Yeah, well, at first they did them at the Manhattan Center, which everyone thinks it's the same. I mean, it's the same building that ECW ran later on, and Ring of Honor, of course, but it was actually upstairs. It was like the smaller portion upstairs, because there's an upstairs and then there's a downstairs. The downstairs is a little bit bigger than the upstairs, not by much, but it's got a kind of like balcony. It almost reminds me of like theater seating, basically,
Okay.
because they have the little balconies up top, and you have enough leeway for fans to spread out. But upstairs they had kind of a smaller room where barely everything fit. It was like fans on bleachers, fans on the floor, and a ring, and then this little atmosphere that they were creating.
But if I remember, that was to give it a maybe like a, I don't know how to describe it, maybe like a Fight Club type feel, because you have people surrounding it, and they're not perfectly laid out and arranged in like all the seats. It had a, well, and then like you had said, like a bleachers type feel.
Yeah, they legit had bleacher. Basically, it reminded me of a high production independent show. Was what it reminded me of. It was like a independent show with that WWF stamp. So, uh, and the early shows, I felt looked great. I mean, they had a very enthusiastic New York crowd who was into everything they were doing, good, bad, or indifferent. Uh, those early Raws were great watches, and Manhattan Center actually is not that far from where Madison Square Garden is. It's literally diagonally, it's like diagonally up and over across the street, basically. Like it's kind of like down the street a piece, diagonally across. So it was a good building with good atmosphere and with fans that actually wanted to see what was going to happen, and it felt like it was a different feeling show because it was live, and primetime wasn't. So
Yeah.
primetime, a lot of cam matches, and Monday Night Raw just wasn't, and they had like separate. It was kind of like they had their own little separate storylines going for that show, and then they had every other show, Superstars Challenge, Wrestling Spotlight, whatever you got in your area. But it was a different feeling show, you know.
Did they have a set commentating team, or did they kind of rotate out like they do like every pay-per-view or so?
Well, of course, Vince was the head. He always was, and you have Macho Man, who was always there, and you also had Bobby Heenan, and you had Rob Bartlett. Like I said, the New York DJ. Um, Macho Man came on. I mean, Macho Man was very well part of the first season, but like they were, for some reason they were trying to push Rob Bartlett on everyone. I don't know why. I don't know why. He was not good.
And he didn't have a wrestling background.
No, and Vince wanted it that way apparently. So
Maybe
that
try to
way,
break into a new audience.
yeah, like I said, those fans in New York knew who he was. Little Tony, who was 10 years old or whatever, just like little Chad, probably had no freaking clue. Like, was like, who the heck is this guy? I remember
Yep.
one episode was unbearable. I remember he dressed in an Elvis suit and did an Elvis impression the whole commentary for Raw. That 1 hour felt like 10. So,
When did they introduce the second hour? Because you had Monday Night Raw and then Raw is War, and everything that I kind of understand it. That's something that Bischoff would try to do with Monday Nitro. Different commentary teams, different locations for them as well, and so it was almost like a different product, but it was still being filmed in the same location. When did they add hour two to Monday Night Raw?
not until much later. They experimented with it at the end of '96. If you remember the Brian Pillman episode,
Hmm.
where, Austin broke into his house it was like one of the first episodes where they experimented with it. Of course, that footage was kind of like shot live on tape. It was like like they had a satellite feed going to it. They shot it all there, and they had like cam matches, for the rest of the Raw, like the regular canned Raw matches that they would normally have. And then that footage was the only footage that was live. So, or live to tape, I should say, because there was a delay and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, but the end of 96, they experimented with it. By 97, the first Raw's War episode was March 10th, 1997, which was in the Worcester Centrum, which is now the DCU Center,
Yeah.
up here in Worcester. So they pretty much introduced the concept by then. Like by then, it became normal standard practice that the second hour was going to happen. USA wanted more content. Vince wanted to compete with Turner. So, and he had a strong enough roster at the time to do so. So
Did Nitro debuted at 2 hours, right?
no, Nitro was an hour. Nitro was an hour.
Well, I remember the first one from the Mall of America was an hour. They didn't go the 2 hours shortly after that.
Not their first 2 hour episode was actually Memorial Day 96, because that was
Oh,
the debut of Scott Hall through the crowd. That was their first episode where it was 2 hours. So
that's brilliant programming right there.
yeah. So Raw was still an hour until, like I said, until about 97-ish,
Yep.
then hence Raw's War. Once they rebranded themselves and had the Raw's War logo that we all knew and loved during the Attitude Era, that's when they were off to the races.
But
So
even around this time, you only had a completely live Monday Night Raw every 2 or 3 weeks, right?
yeah, well, at first they were all live, and of course, they cost Vince and the company a massive fee to produce, because and that was by design, because Vince wanted a different product. So he felt, no matter what it costs, we're going to try it, and it's going to work, until it economically did not become feasible to try it anymore. So, and
Yeah.
there were some factors that played into it, various lawsuits, and also the steroid trial played into it very heavily as well, because WWE lost probably in the neighborhood ballpark around $8 million, just in lawyer fees. So of course they had to cut the budget everywhere they could cut the budget. So Raw went from being live every week to, okay, it's going to be live 1 week and tape for the next 3. So they would do these just like how they would do with WWF Superstars or Challenge, or then later Action Zone. They would just tape all these different episodes.
But that really didn't flow with this newly branded, newly packaged product that Vince was putting out, especially if now we're seeing the first kind of lines in the sand drawn for the Monday Night War. Because Bischoff started to give away the matches on Raw even before Hall showed up, didn't he?
Yes, he
Okay.
would regularly give them away, because that was back when they had the dirt sheets, which unlike today, which are basically dirt apps, so to get your information. But you had pieces of paper, and typically Dave Meltzer would have because he had eyes everywhere, so he would have results for all the different shows, because Wrestling Observer came weekly in the mail back then. And Industry
That's
Insider,
crazy.
Industry Insider subscribed to that. So they would get it, and they, of course, meaning Bischoff, would read it off and say, hey, this so and so, this happened, and he would just give away the results freely, which really totally screwed up Vince's plans to kind of tell the narrative, like his own narrative.
Yeah.
Also, want to mention that while the Raws were canned, Vince would go in every week. He would call canned matches from Stamford.
Yeah.
So that way he could change the commentary around to where, where he saw fit. So they would do like live to tape commentary from Stamford, Connecticut.
They did that with other shows too before this, like All American Wrestling and stuff. They would have like on whatever days would be like a TV day where all the guys would come in. He would have commentators sit down and watch it as if it was live to give it a fresh take from the guys on the headset, right?
Right. It was to not shatter the illusion of the fact that it was indeed canned and everyone knew it was canned. So, even back then, a blind man knew it was canned. But they would put their own little spice on it, by or they would have like Lawler or Vince say something topical that would happen like literally that day, just to kind of create the illusion it was live, but in reality it was not. So
Well, and he wasn't really able to get away with that for too long, with Bischoff and Monday Nitro coming up. So the end of '96, we have Austin wins King of the Ring, Austin 316.
Yep.
The NWO was formed over the summer as well. Some people might have heard of that. And and now you have and this is around the same time you said that Raw is just going to go live every week, heading into '97.
Yep.
Because I keep thinking back to, like, I remember Luger showed up on the first episode of Nitro, which was a really big deal, and then Hall, and then Nash, and so that really does kind of seem like the blueprint was that the WWF guys are just going to show up on WCW's program. It was brilliant, and it worked too. When did either company really kind of dig their heels in, and now they're committed to this? We have 2 hours of Nitro, Monday Night Raw, Raw is War. We're in the beginning of '97. Getting ready for WrestleMania 13. When was the first shot fired for the Monday Night Wars, if it's possible to say?
Some would say it was Luger jumping. Others would say it was Medusa jumping and dropping the belt in the trash. I wouldn't say those were like quote unquote shots fired. They were just shocking things that had happened. With Luger, his contract legitimately had been up for 6 months beforehand. So him jumping, that was more of a shock to the people in WWF at the time, because they thought they were going to negotiate something with Luger, a standard wrestling contract, and Luger wasn't having it. He wanted the contract with the perks. So he knew he can get it in WCW, just not at first. He actually took a pay cut to go there. So and show he was a team player. And of course it was revisited, and he got the raise he wanted and the guaranteed contract he wanted. But it wasn't happening in WWF at the time because they weren't giving out contracts. That didn't come until much later. So
there's next to no guaranteed money then.
No. I remember getting I got a ticket stub from '95 signed by Kevin Nash once as Diesel. He signed it as Diesel. I said, "Man, look at those ticket prices, Nash." I go, "You can't even touch those today." It was $5 for a children's admission for this 5-hour long marathon taping. And Nash, you know what Nash says to me? He goes, "Yeah, no wonder why we weren't getting paid." I mean, he's right. They weren't. He's been noted as saying they were taking draws just so they could pay bills at home, because the money was not there like it had been previous, where, like your Hogans and your Warriors and Pipers of the world were making humongous money, you know.
Yeah.
That by 1995, that was almost non-existent. They were making money, but you know, I think Brett may have had a guaranteed contract. Brett had a $400,000 contract at the time, which was, don't get me wrong, that's big money, but it's that's nothing in the grand scheme of things.
I mean, not when you're on the road 300 days a year. It isn't. I mean, even back then, that doesn't work for me, brother.
No, no. No, it's not hard to see. You know, going forward, and I just mentioned Kevin Nash, when Hall jumps, and then when Nash jumps the next week. I think when Nash jumps the next week, because his contract was up June 6th of 96, and he jumps that following week after his contract is completely up. Once he makes the jump, because Hall making the jump was one thing. He was just the Intercontinental Champion, you know, pretty decent sized name. But when Nash jumps, here's this guy who was, you know, yeah, he was in WCW before with a few failed gimmicks, but he was just fresh off of being world champion, you know, not even 6 months before.
He was a Triple Crown winner in less than a year. That's a big deal back then.
Right. And, you know, and for better or worse, you know, that clique, you know, those two members were the better part of the 1990s as far as giving us great matches, great moments, great memories. You know, again, there's a reason you think of the 90s. You think of them, you think of Brett, you think of Undertaker, because those were the guys that were constantly delivering no matter what. So I think when Hall and then when Nash jumps, that's the first real shot, in my opinion. And then, you know, what goes as follows is everyone making the jump. You know, all of a sudden, if you had some sort of affiliation with WWF in some way, you suited that NWO angle, that original angle, and what that meant. You know, it was a perceived takeover. Yeah. Yeah.
You could jump over on Monday night, get a new T-shirt, and probably more guaranteed money than you were making with Vince.
And not just a Monday Night Raw in general, but that just shows you how strong WWE's WWF back then's branding and television you know, was back then. You know, that you can come off that and you're coming on this TV, which, you know, by all accounts, Turner had infinitely more money and resources than WWF ever had, you know, but they came off such strong TV here that when they went down there, it was like they were gods.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Turner, you know, is a media empire that happened to have a wrestling promotion. Vince and WWF is just a wrestling promotion. They're like the Nintendo against Sony and Microsoft. You know, if Sony stopped making the PlayStation, they're not going to go out of business. If Microsoft stopped making the Xbox, they're not going to go out of business. They're going to lose a lot of money. But Nintendo, if they stop making the Switch, they're out of business. And so I can kind of see something similar with Turner and Vince and how their business models were kind of structured back then.
Yeah, that's well said. And perfect. Exactly. You know, but again, that WWF TV was so strong. You know, if you were a superstar there, you could pretty much write your ticket at that in that point in time. You know, and for Hall and Nash, thankfully, that angle, that original NWO angle, worked to their, you know, to where they could pull something like that off. Because again, the internet existed, but it was in its infancy, especially in pro wrestling. It takes a few years for pro wrestling fans to catch up to technology like that. So,
yeah. Well, and if you watch a lot of WWF stuff from there, you see guys after their match backstage with somebody on a laptop. You have they had the 1-900 numbers before this, but you know, you saw them on the phones back then with like a cord, you know, Macho Man's yelling at everybody. That was hysterical. But you know, like with Livewire and stuff like that, you know, Vince seemed to be trying to keep up with the times and get his guys and his product, you know, plugged and make it interactable on any place he could.
Yeah, because he was just grasping at straws at that point, like because WCW was we're talking this was end of 96, early 97, so WCW is really cranking on all four cylinders and they are rocking and rolling. They may not be putting out the best wrestling product of all time, in my opinion, as far as storylines and character development, but man, they were a clear winner right there, and Vince was just trying at anything at that point in time, anything to generate a rating, and to generate eyeballs on the product. Of course, that wouldn't happen until about a year later when, they do all the Mike Tyson angle with Steve Austin, and that's when the turn really starts to happen. The lead up to WrestleMania 14 is really when the tide starts to turn WWF's favor. They weren't winning the ratings yet, but they were getting close. They were getting on their ass. So,
well, and I think that's where you can start to see kind of behind the curtain a little bit that if Eric was and is brilliant and was creating he helped revolutionize this business just as much as anybody else ever. But again, if
the only guy to put Vince McMahon on his ass at that time, and you can try to spin the narrative all you want, but we lived through it. We know. WCW had a hotter product at one point, and
for a while.
Yeah, and there was no disputing that. By 1998, in 1999, they had over 200 wrestlers under contract. And we're talking like some heavy hitter Hall of Fame wrestlers, from, Hogan and Flair to Rey Mysterio to Conan to, everybody all the way down. They had a stacked roster by the end of 98 going into 99, and then of course the wheels fell off. So,
well, and that's where you could start to see that, behind the curtain, WCW was really just an appendage to a media company. And what Vince was doing was his livelihood, his life, and his legacy were on the line. If WCW folds or is sold for pennies on the dollar, which it eventually would, everybody over there is still going to be able to go to their office and get reassigned. Where Vince, over there, that was, you're going to be king of that mountain, and you're going to be the only people on it. And so I think there just was a greater need for Vince and all the guys there to become more innovative. It was change or die.
Yeah, they had to, and it made for some great television product. And you know what? We grew up at the right time to watch that, because while it may have been a little goofy a few years earlier with, the beginnings of Monday Night Raw when we were like 10 or 11 years old, by that point, you're talking 97, 98, we're 15, 16 years old, and they're trying this brand new product out called WWF Attitude, which they had the whole time, but oh man, like that's what every teenager wants to do. They want to flip off whoever, parent, boss, what have you. They want to just cuss people out, much like DX was doing. They want to be as cool as The Rock. Nobody could be as cool as The Rock, but damn, some kids tried. But you had these really strong characters, and that's when it swung back the other way, eventually. And it didn't just captivate us as teenagers. It must have captivated a whole audience. That they captured that, I would say, 13-year-old audience to 25-year-old audience perfectly at that time, and they really struck a nerve with those characters.
They made wrestling cool. We started to see guys in high school who were, cracking jokes at, recess for wearing an Undertaker shirt, now walking around with Austin 316 shirts, trying to
rock,
Yeah.
It was the cool thing to do, and again, that speaks to the character development on WWF's part, because there was nobody like Stone Cold, and to this day there's nobody like Stone Cold Steve Austin. The crowd pop will tell you there's nobody like Steve Austin. But man, when he was really into his Stone Cold run and doing his thing, whew, nobody hotter.
Yeah. I mean, that glass would break, and every person, whatever building he was in, it just, as Vince would say, would come unglued. And like that building would come unglued, and it was like you get goosebumps. I get goosebumps now, even just kind of, remembering. Everybody would jump up and explode, and that glass hit, and I came out in a beer truck, and even like Kurt Angle coming out in a milk truck later was, just is just hysterical. But I feel like it's things like that we did see on Monday Night Raw that we wouldn't see on Nitro, that really helped WWF at the time kind of pull away. So when would you say that, jumping into like 90s, 97, 98, when did WWF start to catch up? Maybe towards the middle or the end of those 83 weeks. Was there anything in particular that you think, kind of, this is the place, this is the spot right here where they kind of turned it around into where they're going to start pulling away from Nitro?
Yep. Once Austin had the confrontation with Tyson, because that was media news. That wasn't wrestling news. That was everyone in the media knew what was going on with that. Now, everyone in the media also knew that Mike Tyson was going to be utilized in pro wrestling. They knew he signed a short-term contract with Vince, and that was because at the time he was banned from boxing. So, and he was hot news at that time. Not dissimilar to what WCW did the year before with Dennis Rodman. In March of '97, they capitalized on his notoriety also. So, and it worked fabulously for them. They did that big buy rate at Bash at the Beach later that year in July of '97. So, with the tag match with Hogan and against Luger and the Giant. So, flash forward 6 months later, they're doing the same thing with Mike Tyson, but this time they're putting him in with their hippity top guy, not wrestling, but, utilizing him in a way where he didn't look weak in any means, did it with respect, but also kept Austin real good and kept his rep real good. So, and they were gearing up towards WrestleMania. They weren't gearing up towards Bash at the Beach. So it was a little different. It felt different. And Shawn was, arguably at the time, while in '96, Shawn had his title run and it was great. And he was wrestling top 5-star matches on Raw every week in 1996 after he wins the title at WrestleMania 12. Flash forward, Shawn is in DX and starts that with a young Triple H, and Shawn's promos just become fabulous. He's a great heel, and he is putting on clinics in the ring, until, of course, he end of '97 going into '98. Of course, he blows out his back in the beginning of '98, so that kind of halters plans a little bit, but that's where they utilize Mike Tyson in that storyline more. So this is where WWF is brilliant. They took chicken shit and made chicken salad out of that angle. Hey, what can we do? Because Shawn's not particularly on this episode this week. Oh, we can throw Austin with Tyson. And let's see what happens. Just a confrontation, and
and
people,
even
people bid on that.
Oh yeah,
I bid on.
And even building up to that, with the Mr. McMahon character kind of having the seeds planted, as during Austin when his rise. I don't remember as much as I used to, but that episode where Tyson was there, Vince is there. He has his his backstage goon entourage there, Tyson's, and then Austin comes out, and man, uh, uh, the crowd comes unglued. And I remember Austin being down and Vince screaming, "You ruined it! You ruined it! Damn it! You ruined it!"
Yeah.
And that was 1,000 times more captivating than anything the NWO was doing at the time. Like, that was innovative. It branched out of wrestling, like you had said, into Hollywood and entertainment, and it came off flawless.
Yeah, and it made both characters look better than when they came in. That was just basically a pull apart angle, and they do that all the time now. But back then, that was a pull apart angle with meaning behind it, because you had these two really strong characters, and you had the arcing storyline also of Vince not wanting his champion to be Stone Cold Steve Austin. That would be the worst thing that would ever happen. I'm sure he didn't want Shawn at that state as champion either, but Shawn was the devil he knew. Austin was the devil he didn't know. So
Yeah.
you had that going, and then you had the Montreal. He was coming fresh off the Montreal thing, so where Vince was convinced he was a babyface in this whole situation, but the crowd was not convinced, and I'm glad they pulled that little pivot too, because
Yeah.
without that, there wouldn't be the seed sown for that Mr. McMahon character that was to come more so in 98, and just week after week after week, just building. So, and that was the thing. Once they were off to the races with Austin, man, they him and the Austin and the Mr. McMahon character, because of course they only had Tyson for a short term. Michaels had the back injury. He was leaving after WrestleMania. So it didn't leave WWF with a whole lot of options except for Vince himself to get involved with this storyline, and that was an act of desperation too.
Yeah.
Don't get it twisted, but that was a calculated desperation move that worked, and it just worked perfectly with those two.
Yeah.
It really.
Brett screwed Brett.
Yeah. Yeah. Vince was a clear babyface in that one. Yeah. I'm protecting my company.
And
Brett
then,
screwed Brett.
yeah, and then they had a little person come out with the Bret Hart mask for DX to put in the sharpshooter. Yeah.
Yeah, very tastelessly done, but that was one of those Vince Russo writings where and I'm not gonna sit here and knock Russo because honestly he was, for better or worse, he was responsible for a lot of what went on in that time period too. He was one of the unsung heroes in the back. Him and Ed Ferrara were the unsung heroes as far as writing for talent and making every piece of talent on the card important. Whereas by 1999, they get to 1999, every character on the card has something to do. Every character has a storyline. They may not be the best storylines, but they have something to do where the fans were invested. And that's where Vince and Ed Ferrara's strong suit were.
Yeah.
So,
and I know there is all kinds of unfavorable stories about Vince Russo, but I've heard from quite a few people that at least he would find something for everyone to do. If what you're doing just wasn't catching on, he would sincerely try to come up with something, and it may not have worked, but everybody has a job at that point. When did he go to WCW? Him and Ferrara left. Did they leave together?
Yeah, they left together, and they were in WWF all the way until late 1999. More specifically, I think they left at the end of September, going into October of '99. Right in the beginning, it was right not too terribly long after Fall Brawl '99 is when they left. They made the jump. Because Vince Russo wanted a pay raise for all the, he was all of a sudden tasked with writing 2 shows, and Vince didn't want to pay him, what he was worth. So Russo took, what he had and tried to apply it down in Atlanta. But I think not only was it bad timing, not only did the wheels fall off of WC, or were starting to fall off by that point, but that I don't even think Russo could have gone down there to, he couldn't put the Midas touch on the crap pile that WCW had at that moment in time in 1999, because of course this is when they were doing the hiring freezes and they were cutting talent left and right that they just had unnecessarily under contract. They changed, they had standards and practices, which of course hampered Russo's writing quite a bit, and Ed Ferrara's writing quite a bit. So they were just doomed to fail from day one. Russo got paid. I mean, and then Ferrara got paid what they were, for their talents. It's just, it wasn't there.
When did Thunder get introduced?
1998. Yeah, right in the beginning of 1998. Which nobody wanted that show. Nobody within WCW wanted that show. The talent didn't want that show because they didn't want to work any extra dates, because that was the reason they went to WCW in the first place, was to work less dates and make more money. Makes sense. Of course, they hire Bret Hart for that sole purpose, to Thunder, to get those fans. It's not dissimilar to how SmackDown's structured now, where SmackDown's more of the wrestling show and Raw is more of the entertainment show. Mm-hmm. Two different shows. I get the logic. It's just, you had talent that wasn't on board. The big name talent wasn't going to work Thunder, very, very little. And it was going to rest upon Bret Hart's shoulders, which, by all accounts with Bret, they would fly him to TV and they wouldn't use him, or they would use him a promo. That would be it. Bret Hart was not utilized like a Bret Hart should have been, in my opinion, in WCW.
Yeah, so, I've heard a lot of interviews from both sides as to what happened and what could have happened with Bret, but ultimately, I don't remember him ever really having a whole lot to do. Like, I think personally that kind of stems down to certain people having creative control in their contract. I don't think that works in wrestling. If you have one of the guys who is on screen also, with the book, I just don't think that works. You need to have somebody who can overrule them or just say no. And it really seemed like they were happy to have Bret there. They made him United States champion. And then, in the NWO, out of the NWO, there was just so many different shit piles that they were drawing from to try to put a presentable product together. And
it's the inmates were running the asylum by that point, or were starting to, A. And B, there was, while Bischoff was the boss, he wasn't really the boss, per se. Ultimately, in WWF, everyone knows who the boss is, and you have to get everything by Vince. Same with Russo and Ferrara. People love to bag on them, but as writers and for their ideas. But you know what? Vince had to sign off on those ideas. So without Vince's approval, none of that stuff would have happened. And I think the biggest example for that would be the Brawl for All, which gets a lot of hate, but quite honestly, Vince signed off on it. So, I mean, I think the heat is unjust. Yeah, while Russo may have come up with the idea in countless ideas that he's come up with over the years, the hate is in the wrong place, in my opinion. The hate should be with the guy who ultimately signed off on it. He gets the ultimate responsibility. You can't just write it off. Right. You can't just write it off and say, it was all Russo and it was his idea. No, Vince had to sign off on that because everyone knew in WWF who was the boss. So, you know.
So we have Thunder, end of the 90s. SmackDown is on its way. When did Nitro go to 3 hours?
Nitro went to 3 hours in '98. They added the third hour, and they mainly did that for for ad revenue. As same thing that happens today. That's why Monday Night Raw is still 3 hours, because you get that hour of ad revenue that just makes them money. And same thing. It was making Turner Broadcasting money. It was not necessarily making WCW money, because, from all accounts from Bischoff, the money was being allocated other places, so WCW was making the money. It was just, it wasn't being dispersed evenly, so to speak.
And that kind of touches back to WCW is just more of a cog in a bigger machine, where what's best for the company, what's best for the boys, may not always come first. And in a sports entertainment business, I don't think it could work in that model. I mean, it didn't for WCW, but I don't think anybody could have made that work.
Reminds me of the premise of Terminator 3. You've seen Terminator 3, right? Where Arnold says, where John Connor says, hey, I thought we stopped Judgment Day. And Arnold says, you didn't stop Judgment Day, you prolonged it. Judgment Day is inevitable. And I think a lot of that goes with WCW too. Judgment Day was inevitable. I think Bischoff just prolonged what ultimately was going to happen, within the Turner organization, because nobody wanted wrestling. The one person, and he maintains this to this day, the one person that wanted wrestling was Ted Turner. That was it. And that goes back to when, TBS was a UHF station, just starting out, and wrestling got its highest ratings. Wrestling and Andy Griffin, so that was it. Back when they started. And I think it was Ted's way of basically paying tribute to what basically brought him to the dance. Fair to say? Yeah. I'd say that.
Yeah. All right, so we are creeping up on Y2J. Raw's Nitro's at 3 hours, and I can remember even just like diehard smart Mark as little teenage Chad was, the Nitro even having like that extra hour. I get done with Raw and it's like, like the product was really stale, and I don't think I really understood the process of bringing something like that 3 hours. Because at first it's like, cool, it's like you have a pay-per-view almost every week. It's 3 hours long, and again, teenage Chad with his Bret Hart glasses and everything, loved that. But once that kind of gets off the ground, I remember very clearly just, I may flip back and forth from Raw to there, but after Raw, I'm gonna go play Super Nintendo or something. That Nitro just was not cutting the mustard.
Yeah, Raw left you with a good feeling, because Raw was a very well written, well structured show. Within that 2 hour time frame, you could tell they used every second down to the second. That like their life depended on it, especially when they were in a competition with WCW. WCW, when they got that third hour, it just seemed they were on autopilot a lot of times, with the fast and loose way they were booking shows. Now I would watch Raw, of course, live, and then I would tape Nitro, because Nitro had that replay taping. So I would tape Raw, but I would, pop the tape in, go to bed, watch the replay the next morning, before school, I remember. And I would also remember just fast forwarding more than I watched, to be honest. And that third hour was not necessary to anybody except for Turner, for ad revenue. That was it.
Yeah.
Not dissimilar to how Raw has been the last, I would say, 5-6 years. Especially when they bumped it up to 3 hours. That was
When did that happen?
Raw going 3 hours. It happened sometime in the
That's ruthless aggression, right?
Yeah, a little bit after, I'd say 2009, 2010 time period. Maybe 2011. It was like the 2010s years were when they started all of a sudden bumping it up to 3 hours. And having that much wrestling on is, I guess, good if you're a wrestling junkie, but if you're into watching a well-structured, well-written show, it's 3 hours is long, man. 1 hour is long. If you're watching a episodic show, 1 hour is long. Never mind three. So,
and it's especially where there isn't any competition. There isn't another product to compare it to. And before we jump into there, take us to Nitro is 3 hours, not doing great. Bischoff is let go, but he's brought back.
yep.
When does Vince open up his wallet and buy WCW? And I think what he was most interested in, the tape library. When does he crack open his wallet and make that purchase? What led us to that? Like, what was the immediate right before that?
Well, he if you have to go back to the lawsuit that was filed with using the intellectual properties with Hall and Nash as Razor and Diesel in WCW. Now, as per terms of the settlement, it was WWF had first rights to negotiate if WCW was sold. So
McDivitt was a genius.
yeah, so they worked that into the settlement, which of course, most people gloss over, but Vince kept that in the back of his mind. You can rest assured he did. Especially when they got in trouble. So, and also he had a WCW executive that worked for Turner, working within WWF at the time, and was kind of like, he kind of knew the inner turmoil workings, and the name escapes me right now, but I know that Vince had hired somebody who previously worked for Turner, and then he went back. He went to Vince and then went back to Turner, and then coincidentally enough, the company gets sold not that long after. So, almost like that set employee knew. But
was there like again like a definitive moment where this is the shot that is gonna take out WCW? They're driving by the grassy knoll, and this is the end.
I would say when the Bash at the Beach incident happens with Hogan and Russo, that whole big angle, which that's what it was going to be. It was going to be a giant angle just to bring Hogan back again. And then when Russo swerves him, and Hogan, of course, files a real lawsuit against both WCW and Vince Russo for breach of contract. That's when I think it starts to fall off, where other talent couldn't trust that the not just Russo, but the WCW as a company as a whole. So a lot of guys either just stopped showing up to work or got out of their contracts, and got payouts. So I think that may have been the beginning of the end, really, because but early 2000 they had some juice. They still had the guys and the girls on the roster that can go. Then they had names, but by the end of 2000 they were going a different direction. They were pushing Scott Steiner, Booker T, Jeff Jarrett, and Diamond Dallas Page very heavily. And while those guys are all big stars in their own right, they were not Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall. They weren't Bret Hart. Because Bret by then had already gotten hurt. So, and they cut his contract loose little after the whole 2000 time period. April 2000, his contract was cut loose. So they gave Brett a payout. So it was, you could just tell the vibe was there. I'd say probably late 2000, you could just tell that WCW was just running on fumes and running out of ideas. So,
well, and if you look at Montreal, whether or not it is an elaborate work, what could be its own series, but you can at least see Vince's point of view, even if you don't agree with it at all. Who he is as the owner of the company and running the company, and maybe he was kind of projecting because he seemed to be the one that loved to take other companies' champions with their titles and put them prominently on his own show. So
yeah, that angle came off as hypocritical to me just right from the beginning, because you really just had to look about 6 years earlier with Flair.
Yeah. And so even, you can at least see Vince's point of view. But Russo, like you said, swerving Hogan at that point, there's, like, I remember a lot of people have recounted when Bret was walking out of the arena. It's like, if they can do it to me, they will do it to you. And that's a really good point. I know a lot of the boys took that to heart. We take a look at Russo, WCW, and Hogan. If he can do that to Hogan at that time period in that company, literally no one is safe. No one is kind of protected at that point, right?
No, and that all stemmed from Russo's not wanting to negotiate with Hogan. Bischoff and Hogan had a great relationship because they always, and they may not have agreed with each other 9 times out of 10, but they always came to a compromise.
Yeah.
Russo wasn't about to hear it. You know what I mean? It's two different personalities is what it really comes down to. And I think there could have been a way where it would have worked, but again, the horse was already out of the barn by that period in 2000. That was the summer of 2000. By late 2000, it was already, you could just tell. Then they publicly, I remember, Mark Madden and Tony Schiavone, among others, Scott Hudson on commentary, hinting at a possible sale. Bischoff actually did put out some feelers to buy the company. So, and had a legitimate media company behind him willing to put up the money. The problem was it did not come with those television slots, and that's when Fusion Media had to pull out of the deal, was because they thought they were going to be guaranteed those television slots, and they weren't, and back then that was so important. Now in streaming, that is not important. If you're not on Netflix one week, you're canceled, you can be on Hulu the next,
or YouTube.
Or YouTube, or any streaming platform. It's infinite now. Back then, you didn't have those options. So,
yeah,
having those the precious television time was important. So,
and so coming up to we have the Hogan Swerve, and this was after Russo had rebooted the company, right, where he had all the champions come out, relinquish the titles, which was very interesting. But that sounds like something you do in like a WWF video game. It's like, all right, here, we're just gonna start over. Like, to do that in a company, again, was very interesting, but just boggles the mind. And this was after that, right?
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. I remember that episode of Nitro being very good. That was actually my birthday. I think my Yeah, that happened on my 18th birthday. I remember in 2000, and this was April 10th, 2000. I remember it clear as day. And I remember thinking to myself, this was a great episode, and I'm sure they're going to get the same 2 million viewers. But imagine what if they had done this when they came to the company 6 months ago and did this whole big reboot when they actually had more people under contract before they started cutting people loose. You imagine what they could have done with those angles. Man, that would have been huge. But I think it was too little too late. I like the idea a lot though, because it did give us some dream matches that us as fans wanted to see. Flair versus Shane Douglas was one of the big ones for me. I wanted to see that match. Sadly, both men were at their physical bests to perform, but I wanted to see that. I did not want to see Jeff Jarrett as world champion, but I understood why he was made world champion, because he felt that his talents were that's why he went to WCW in the first place, because he felt his talents were not utilized to its fullest in WWF. So he took a shot down in WCW and came simultaneously with Russo, pretty much.
Well, yeah, and kind of piggybacking off of what you said, breaking up the log jam at the top of the roster and with the world title there. I think that's probably what led to I think that was the like again with like Booker T and Jarrett and everything. Getting new guys, slightly younger guys, to be able to rotate into there was the biggest win from that.
Yeah.
And again, I just thought it was because didn't they had just introduced the cruiserweight tag team championships?
Yeah.
They had a lot of titles at this point.
Yeah, towards the end of 2000, which that wasn't unlike WCW to have a lot of titles, as you and I both know, and we go back and look in history. But yeah, that was the problem though. They would start an idea and then they just wouldn't know what to do when that said idea. They couldn't see an idea through completely, good, bad, or whereas Vince could, and his writers and his creative team could, because they had just better everything to them. And Raw, by that point, we're talking 2000, so they were on all four cylinders in 2000. They couldn't do no wrong. That wouldn't come until about the summer of 2001 when they started the invasion angle. That's when the wheels started to fall off for them, for WWF, meaning because the war had already been won, and they were trying to do an inter promotional war, but you and I both know in the wrestling business how those inter promotional wars go, and they always go in favor of the person writing the narrative. They meaning WWF. So
yeah, I was I had already enlisted in the Air Force, and I gotta say, not having a lot of military buddies then that were as much in love with the product that like you, me, Tim were. I still kind of loosely followed it, but it really was just seemed really kind of thrown together. And then after that, I think the brand split was actually a really cool idea. Whether or not it's been done, perfectly every year is a different story. But by that point, breaking into ruthless aggression, it became kind of easy to kind of fade away from whatever they had going on. So to wrap up Nitro, we have Nitro is 3 hours. Bischoff just comes back before it was sold. And he was trying to buy the company out himself. McDivitt, that genius of a man puts in the settlement with WCW when Hall and Nash first show up in '96 that if anything, I can't remember like what exactly it was, but they had first dibs if anything, like the tape library and stuff, ever came up for a sale. And so Vince, I mean, literal, like $2 million, right? Like to buy everything.
That's it. I mean, basically he bought the rings, intellectual properties, the tape library, which was really the most important. He did acquire some contracts too, but it was all the lesser paid talent. He did acquire a lot of the contracts. He didn't acquire, of course, your Goldbergs and your Hogan's of the world, or Hall and Nash's of the world. However, he acquired say your younger guys, your Mark Jindrak, Sean O'Hare, young AJ Styles, for a brief piece, and handful of others that were in WCW. Now, Booker T and Diamond Dallas Page were different cases because they actually took pay cuts to come to WWF. They took pay cuts out of their contract to come. They gambled on themselves to get there.
Because they could have sat home and been paid out millions for the next year or two, right?
Oh yeah, they could have wrote it out much like Hogan, Goldberg, all those guys that were the bigger names, because they were all getting paid by Turner himself in Turner Sports. They were not getting paid by WCW, so it did not cost WCW quote unquote a thing, and that's what people like to tend to believe, like, oh, those big contracts put them out of business. No, the bigger contracts were signed by Turner Sports. They were not signed by WCW, The ones that were signed by WCW were basically like the power plant guys, and a lot of the younger talent that had just made their way on the roster that were making 75 grand a year to 200 grand a year, which it's not different than NXT is now. They sign a bunch of guys and they'll sign like 10 to 12 people at $150,000 a piece to start, and you take a gamble on one of those guys or girls and they hit pay dirt and they get over, they make the company and themselves millions. So WCW was doing the same thing in essence.
Yeah. Really. And in essence, that is kind of like a win-win situation. The only downfall is that if you don't hit pay dirt, now you're going back to wrestling in a gym.
Yeah, but you gain that experience, which
and the exposure to for whatever it was you were doing.
Yeah. So, again, guys like Booker T and DDP, who were the unsung heroes of the later part of WCW? Because, again, like I said, with them, with Jeff Jarrett, with Scott Steiner, those were the guys that were in the main event picture. And they were pretty much carrying the company on their backs during that time, because all the big talent had left or got let go or sat home, you know what I mean? So, and got paid.
Yeah, and that's where you can see kind of a stark difference between, it's a business. You got to make money to go along. But I think you have kind of two broad categories of people. You have people like Sean and Brett, who are there to make money and provide for their families. But going back to '97, Brett would have stayed for less money. That whole "I'm greedy for respect" thing, that may sound a little cheesy, but I think that's absolutely true. They would have had to have dropped 10 times what he was making to just lure him away before Montreal. And you take a look at people like the Ultimate Warrior, where it's making money first and then the product, good or bad, comes after every time. And like the opposite of that, like Sean and Brett, Undertaker as well. And then you've got a lot of guys who I think walk the line, like Kevin Nash, Hulk Hogan, who they do care about the product, they care about their legacy, but they're there to make money too. And so by that point, I think you can see that there was probably a pretty clear line drawn, and you could see which side of that everybody fell on once Vince acquired the company.
Yeah.
I want to go to the end of Nitro. When was the last episode of Nitro?
March 26, 2001. That was Panama City. They cast that from, which was part of their spring breakout, which, as you know, those were the more memorable episodes of Monday Nitro over the years, for various reasons, whether it's Sting coming down on the helicopter, or what was it, Hall and Nash jumping into the water in Hawaiian shirts one year, or they would always do those memorable spring breakout shows. They did this, their last show was literally outdoors, and I mean, it looked cool because they had a crowd, unlike for the previous year, WCW's crowds were dwindling. So it actually looked cool to have people in the crowd, even though they probably didn't pay. So,
Yeah, it looked good. All right. So, start us off to the last episode of Nitro and the simulcast with Monday Night Raw. When does this start being planned? Where is like the groundwork for this being laid down to where this is going to happen? Vince is going to be on both shows. I remember that so clearly too. I don't remember a whole lot, but I remember seeing them on both. Well, that where did that really start?
I guess people people in the know knew, they knew probably, I would say, probably less than a week before, but for us, the general public, we found out just like everyone else found out over the weekend, right before that Monday show. I remember the week before, Bischoff had said something about, the Nitro being the final one the week before. I think it was like Thunder. So Thursday, it was like a Wednesday or a Thursday. I'm not sure, like the days were the same day or they switched by that point. But I remember hearing Bischoff talk about their last show being at Panama City, which I was like, what? Like
it did come on kind of all of a sudden.
Yeah. So, and then by Monday, of course, you had the weekend and rumors were bubbling, because this was when the internet was, really in full swing, and the reports were just going out left and right about, Vince finalizing buying the company, and then they were going to do a simulcast, and I was like, huh. I remember thinking and reading that. I was like, see how that works, and of course, what we saw was what we saw, and WCW went out swinging. They had a Night of Champions show where every title was on the line. So, unlike the Russo reboot show the year before, where everybody gave up the titles, now everyone was fighting for titles. So,
I remember, like Flair coming out, and he had like the Monday Nitro shirt on. And he wrestled with that. I'm not sure if it was to wear the, kind of go out on your WCW shield, or if he just hadn't hit the tanning bed in a while. But
he had been an on-air figure at the time. He was part of, he was like basically an authority figure / management like kind of figure. He was playing that type role, so he was in suits all the time. He wasn't really working all that much. So Flair probably wasn't in the best shape.
Yeah, but like that was okay, and he came out. There, it was him and Sting, and then we had Booker T go over. It was Scott Steiner who was champion, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so Booker T, went out Well, WCW went out with him on top. Flair put over Sting, which I thought was you can kind of tell that this was just, hey, if we're gonna go out, Flair going or Sting going over Flair just seems kind of appropriate. And I remember afterwards, like Flair just hopped right up, and it was just probably kind of trying to like process everything, and it was just it was cool. It was different, but just seeing all of those guys, all of the for lack of a better term, guys that were either homegrown or had made their mark in the business in WCW, go out there and to see what they wanted to do as their last hurrah. Do you know if Vince had anything to do, or if WWF had anything to do with the card that night?
I know the one all the card matches were that was under WCW's creative regime. However, Flair and Sting were not. That was a request by Vince himself. Because
Oh,
he felt because they opened the first Nitro that they would close the last Nitro in the main event. So because Flair and Sting were in the main event for the first Nitro in '95, so they figure it would be a good bookend for the fans. Flair didn't agree because again he was an authority figure at the time and was not regularly working out and was not regularly working in the ring. So he Flair even said, I'm kind of out of shape and whatever, but I'll do it because you asked. So he did it, and Flair and Sting had yet another. It wasn't one of their best matches in the world because Sting was recovering from shoulder surgery. Flair was basically recovering from not working for months. So it was a kind of a half-ass match, but it was enough to where it was a tribute to,
yeah,
have people, because again, all the big stars were already out, and those two were like the legacy stars that were left standing. So I think they bookended it right by having those two guys on that show that night.
yeah.
Uh,
I think that's very appropriate.
yeah, and of course, you can't have two more true blue WCW guys. I mean, yeah, Flair went to WWF for a cup of coffee, but he was always a WCW guy. So, and Sting was WCW through and through. He never left.
Yeah,
So you
yeah,
had those two guys. It just seemed appropriate to close it out. Followed by the simulcast where you know, Vince kept showing his face, and the first order of business was firing Jeff Jarrett on the air.
that's right.
So
And he was the only one that got called out like that too. Vince kind of left it, up to your imagination. Some people are gonna have a new home, some people won't. But Jeff, you, you ain't coming. I got
nope,
such a kick out of that. And if he hadn't done that, who would have known if we would have TNA?
we wouldn't have TNA without it. We really just wouldn't.
But it
Now,
was still funny.
yeah, and it just proves that Vince has a long memory. Because
Yeah.
you don't hold up Vince for money. That's for sure.
Well, and I've heard him say with Conrad that, this was different than what Warrior did because Jeff was only asking what he was legitimately owed under his contract, but just hadn't been paid out yet. Do you know if that really is the case?
I heard truth lies in the middle because they made Jeff that year, or maybe the year before, take a pay cut, and he
No.
was just trying. He was trying to recoup the money that he lost for that year, contract wise. So I'm sure Jeff is, Jeff has his version, Vince has his version, and the truth lies in there somewhere. But it all comes down to money.
Yeah.
So. And Vince, and it's famous, the famous story going back where Jesse Ventura sued Vince for all his Coliseum video work, right? And got awarded, I think like $1.5 million or something like that. I guess Vince was torn up about it. Vince had said, "That's my money. That's my money." So Vince doesn't forget unnecessary funds he has to pay out.
Yeah,
I wonder how often he said that in 2022 / 2023.
Yeah, that I know. We can wrap up the last Nitro, but when he came back and Stephanie stepped away, Vince, I believe I can't remember if he tweeted it or if it's in one of the notices that went out to like the media or whatever, but he wanted to thank Stephanie for stepping in while he was away. And I'm like, you said you were retiring. You weren't away. You told the WWE universe that you were retiring. I'm not completely shocked that he, came back or anything, but I don't know. I mean, this is going to spawn a whole new library and media and smart mark community to try to dissect everything that went on this year with Vince and the company.
And they can dissect it every which way but Sunday they want about Vince, but Vince is a very complicated person. Vince is not one-dimensional by any means.
No.
And this is just the beginning. I think you're going to hear more stuff coming out, more stuff personally about him. I think he's going to make more weird decisions come 2023. What they are, I don't know. I'm not Merlin. I can't predict, but I do know that the Vince McMahon's character, that ego that drives Vince McMahon, that made him basically a winner in the first place in the game of professional wrestling and promoting professional wrestling, and what made him heads and tails above everybody. That same ego is applied to everything in his life. So, and the old adage of "I'm retiring." Does anybody truly ever retire in pro wrestling?
That's very fair.
Now Vince is retired and unretired. The ultimate guy who said, "I'm going to retire." You figure if he said, "I'm going to retire," damn it, that's my decision. But no.
Well, and it really wasn't his decision. I think that's a big part of it. I think in like the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to see what the big plans are, maybe with Saudi Arabia or maybe with something else. But that was not Vince's choice. And so again, I'm not shocked that he came back, but just how he worded that. And I do have a really genuine curiosity what Stephanie's feelings are on this, because Hunter has a cardiac event, a very serious one, and so usually when people say I'm stepping away from my work life so I can spend more time with my family, that's kind of a smokescreen, probably covering up some kind of shady dealings. In this case, I don't think it was. I think when she said that, it was very genuine. And I'm sure what was going on with her, Nick Khan, and Vince, and all these lawsuits and everything had a lot to do with it. But I wonder if she was happy to come back when he had to step away for 6 months, or if it was something she's like, well, all right, I'll do this, but only because. And so I would be very curious to know which side of the coin that is.
All signs for me point to that second option that you were saying. I'll do this just because everyone knows that Nick Khan was the one running the company this entire time. While, I think Stephanie was more of a figurehead. That's not to say she's not great at business. I mean, she learned from one of the best, in Vince. So you got to be an idiot if you don't pick up something being around. That's your father too, in business, to pick up something around. And Stephanie is known to have that ruthlessness like her dad. So you had I think it was mainly Nick Khan making the big budget decisions, with Triple H being in the creative seat with his team he had in place. Uh, where Stephanie lies, I mean, yeah, I mean, honestly, all signs point to what you were saying there, but I think it's going to be. I said it the other day. I said it's got to be either before or after WrestleMania that the big decision is going to be made, or something. You're going to hear something about going forward, because
I would imagine after building up to 40.
yeah, I mean, you're still a good year out from when television rights deals expire and all that stuff. So it'd be interesting. I hope if there is a company sale, it stays within the states and some big company within the states buys it, not the Saudi Arabians. However, financially, I know the Saudi Arabians have more money than they know what to do with, and they want to westernize Saudi Arabia.
Yeah,
So
there's a lot of money to be made doing that, and it's not like there's going to be another big wrestling promotion to compete with over there either.
right, and for the guys going over there, and maybe for the girls too. I'm not sure how the women's division is actually going to play out if the Saudis buy it. Given
Yeah.
their stance on how they treat women over there, as a whole, which is so behind the times. But for as ahead as they are, they're so behind the times when it comes to certain aspects.
But they did have it was Lacey Evans and Natty, right?
Yeah, and they've had women's matches over there since, but
Yeah, that's
of
great.
course they're covered up in full body suits.
Yeah.
So it's not that it matters, because wrestling is wrestling, but it should be a woman's choice to wear that whole bodysuit. You know what I mean? Should be their choice. But I will say this, for the performers over there, if Saudis do buy it, the only positive that comes out of it is they get paid appearance fees for appearing over there. So they're making extra paydays, much like the old school pay-per-view days, where you're making your contract pay, but you're also making this pay-per-view bonus that you're entitled to get. So, for performers, that's a good deal. The small sacrifices they have to get on a plane and go to Saudi Arabia for 20 minutes work, and they're six figures to $1 million per shot. I mean, really, where's the downside in that? If you're a performer in the business looking to provide for their family and make money,
Yeah.
where's the downside in that?
I mean, and the only thing, kind of looking at that from afar and just kind of picking apart, is that you could have the Brothers of Destruction, DX, Goldberg, guys who I am 100% positive did not have a great interest in doing that in the first place, because they have moved beyond there. I don't think they were compelled. I think they were compensated probably beyond their wildest dreams. So maybe that'll be a path for younger guys to kind of go over. I don't know. I'm not sure. So simulcast of the last Raw, or the last Nitro with
Yep.
Raw. Vince, FIRRE, double D's, Jeff Jarrett.
Yep.
And WCW has its farewell matches that I thought were appropriate. And I do remember looking at it kind of fondly, thinking, wow, this is it.
Yeah.
And then Shane McMahon comes out. And I believe I heard from Bruce, wasn't there was a small entourage of WWF guys backstage. I believe Bruce was at Nitro.
Yeah, Bruce was there, Shane was there, of course, and a couple other WWE production people were there. Mainly to oversee, like oversee the broadcast and make sure everything goes smooth. You know, they were
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And they helped with and then Vince did of course his in-ring simulcast, which did the big promo, victory gloat, and then the people who does the audience want to see? Do they want to see Lex Luger? Do they want to see Goldberg? Do they want to see Hogan? And Vince is like, nah, they're all gonna be buried, all of them. They're gonna stay buried. So, and how do you beat a billionaire? You become one yourself. It was a genius promo, by Vince. And then with the swerve, Shane is on Nitro and WCW is going to continue. And they had full blown plans to actually run WCW as a separate entity. And run house shows as WCW and kind of have like a spin-off branch, almost like how ECW was a few years later. So
teenage Chad didn't really understand all the moving parts that were associated with this, but that was the impression I had, is that WCW is still going to be WCW. Well, and they don't have a TV spot anymore, but that they were going to be a separate entity, and you'd have the invasion angle. They were absorbed. ECW is absorbed. WWE ECW, man, that's a whole series in and of itself. But
oh yeah,
and so that is the last time Monday Night Raw went head to head with WCW Monday Nitro and kind of came out on top.
Yeah, and if you remember and go back and watch, it was actually the go-home show to WrestleMania 17. So, which was the big Austin versus Rock match at WrestleMania, where Austin, of course, turns heel. So, and that was, I would have to say that kind of was a wheel falling off moment too, because how do you turn such a popular character into? But to Austin's credit, he tried making it as entertaining as humanly possible in the following months, and during that abysmal invasion angle that they had that him and Kurt's spots were some bright spots as the backstage segments. Austin's promos were actually funny. He was supposed to be a heel, but he was still very as entertaining as they could be. And and the plans for WCW's house show or for WCW's business to be basically spun off, that all ended with Booker T and Buff Bagwell. That got the kibosh right away. Like they did that one match, and I think their mistake was they put it like directly into the main event and tried making a big deal out of these two guys. Whereas, and they're in Tacoma, Washington, which is not a WCW territory. It's not even a WWF territory, but that was doomed to fail from day one right there. Now, had they had done that in Atlanta, had they had done that in Charlotte, had they had done that in markets where WCW was known, it might have done a little bit better, but not in Tacoma, Washington. Not with Scott Hudson and Arn Anderson on commentary. That was the worst commentary team to end Raw with. Worst. So, yeah, and it ended in a double DQ finish where, Austin came out and basically hit everyone with chairs. So, yeah.
Yeah, that went as well as Billy Gunn winning King of the Ring.
On paper, that had a lot of legitimacy.
They buried him. I mean, that was a clear, I know there's, dirt sheet gossip or whatever. I'm sorry. They gave that to him and then they buried him for it.
It's such a shame because really he could have been a serious threat. And they didn't go that way, sadly. He did get his main event against The Rock, though, in a very entertaining SummerSlam match. So
Yeah, but you weren't really scratching your head as to what was gonna, what was gonna come out of that match. I don't know.
that best Jim Ross call ever, in my opinion. The Rock just stuck Billy Gunn's face in that large woman's ass.
That's right.
Said that as excited as JR can say it, and it was one of the more hilarious moments of that SummerSlam that year. And yeah, but Billy Gunn is a cat with 9 lives. Currently he's one of the better parts of AEW right now, currently as we speak.
Yeah.
So
this is twice he had to pass up an appearance in WWE because he's still employed and still gainfully employed and doing really well in AEW. Like he couldn't be there last night with the rest of DX. So that sucks, but good for him.
Yeah, so they had a Kurt Angle substitute, who's the furthest thing from DX as humanly possible. But
it was funny. It was really fun.
It was like that meme I saw where they talked about Rob Van Dam when he was a guest appearance on Raw. It's like when you stumble upon the wrong show, and he was working for Impact at the time.
All right, so we started with Primetime Wrestling, went into Monday Night Raw. Raw is War to the Monday Night Wars. Yep. And last night was the 30th anniversary of Monday Night Raw. And we ran through not quite the first decade of Raw. And there's a lot that we can come back to later on if we'd like.
Oh, yeah. We're talking 30 years. So it's impossible to fit it in this format of a show. But we've touched upon some of the highlights. So, definitely. And that's very important.
Yeah. If you had any closing thoughts on Primetime Raw, the Monday Night Wars, what would those be?
Well, closing thoughts on that version of Primetime. Well, Primetime. That wasn't I wasn't the audience for that, but Raw, I was the perfect audience for. It was a fresh idea, and I was an impressionable kid, much like yourself, and we were just looking for something new. I think without that, we wouldn't have had this butterfly effect of the Monday Night Wars. We wouldn't have had primetime wrestling being what it is today, where you're having these main event caliber matches. It really all started. Some would say it started primetime, but I think it really all gained the importance with the advent of Monday Night Raw, because it became destination television. Everybody remembers the name. Raw. It's easy. It's an easy name to remember. And it's always on Monday nights. It's an institution at this point. And I think it's far superseded anything that has come before it, prime time or otherwise. My thoughts on that. Now, my thoughts on the 30th anniversary Raw. We had some highlights, and the highlights that we had were really good. Undertaker and Bray. I love that angle.
Yeah, I got chills watching that.
The old passing of the torch, and I like seeing the American Badass character being represented, because that character did not get a lot of love during its time, but really it was Undertaker had his best matches as that character. You can go back and watch any of those matches he performed as that character. They were great, great matches. And he was one of the unsung heroes of the SmackDown brand for a number of years. I liked what I didn't like was the cage match being cut short. That Becky Lynch and Bayley. I did not like that, because on paper I did want to see that match, because a woman's cage match is tailor fit for a Monday Night Raw, and to have it be cut short like that, I'm sure they have the reasons, but I didn't like it. Personally, I didn't like it. Austin Theory and Bobby Lashley, of course, we can touch upon that, because of course it was the return of the Beast, Brock Lesnar, just in time for Royal Rumble season, just in time to come back for WrestleMania. Here comes Brock Lesnar yet again.
That's right.
Yeah. So, but I like the fact that they're continuing the storyline with him and Lashley, like the unfinished business thing. That's good. And I think that can lead into a really good WrestleMania match, if built properly.
Yeah. And I think like the biggest question mark is the bloodline, Roman Reigns. What I
He's
think is
easily the best segment was easily that segment, bar none.
And it's so weird how Sammy kind of got interjected in there, but he owned it. And like him and Solo coming in together, I think the bloodline head of the table thing, it wasn't stale, but there wasn't anything left for them to do at that point. You've conquered the world and universal titles. You unified them. Raw and SmackDown unified them. I mean, you're the longest reigning champion in a long time. I mean, decades. And so I was kind of curious. Him and Brock at SummerSlam. That was a, I don't want to say a masterpiece, but that did exceed my expectations. And to see Brock flip the ring over with the tractor, man, that was cool. And so I don't know what's going to happen with Sammy. And I'm not sure who Roman's going to end up against at WrestleMania, but that's the biggest question mark for me is what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and you know what? Him being interjected in the bloodline is giving the bloodline lifeblood. Otherwise, I mean, I think the Hogan formula or the Cena formula has proven when somebody wins all the time, it just becomes boring and repetitive. But you add some color to it, in the form of Sami Zayn, who's the head mouthpiece, so to speak, because he's even doing more talking than Paul Heyman,
Yeah.
And I think I have the theory I have of him is when the time comes and when they turn him, whether it be heel or babyface, it's going to be the biggest thing in pro wrestling. It really is. And fans are going to care about that storyline. They already do. They're already invested. So, and I've watched this whole storyline play out, and it's honestly one of the better, well done long-term storytelling that they have done in years was with this one character. Now, I wish they could do it for the whole roster, but I'm glad we're getting it at least with one character and in something.
Yeah. And him and Brock they had quite a few matches together. They had a pay-per-view series, month to month. But I don't think that got stale either. The last match they had, I mean, unifying the titles that's huge at WrestleMania. That's a big deal, and it was great. And then, putting it to sleep at SummerSlam went great too. And I think I'm going to be really curious to see what happens with Bray Wyatt being back, him and Undertaker. I see a lot of parallels between them. Like The Fiend a couple years ago, he was the only person in the company doing something like that. In my opinion, he does not replace the Undertaker, nor could he, but he is filling the void that he left, I think, better than anybody else could have.
Yeah, and it's not like Bray has a ton of limitations in the ring as a worker, because when he wants to be, he could be a solid worker. He's a Wyndham / Rotundo. That's literally his name. So it's he can go. It's just that character is more akin to a 21st century character, probably more akin than anybody, I would say. And it taps into a lot of the stuff you see on the big screen or on the small screen. It's as compelling of a character as any of those, in that horror / suspense genre, that Bray Wyatt character is. Now, I would like to see them go the full 9 with him. I really would, like, for real this time.
Yeah.
And it would be nice. time will tell whether they'll do it. They meaning WWE, but I look forward week after week after week to see what he's going to do with that character, and
Yep.
what's going to happen. So he's one of the more interesting characters as well. The problem is that WWE booking, that start-stop booking, which drives me so crazy. Braun was a big. He got that a lot too. His other run with WWE. So, and with Braun, they brought him back, sure, and he's a bona fide main event guy. That's clear, and attraction. However, they're doing some questionable things with him already that I don't like.
Yeah,
So
I don't know.
I'm not even a huge Braun fan, but I can see that tag teaming him with Ricochet is not the answer. This guy should be a credible main event challenger. He really should.
I remember when they announced him and Omos. I can remember going back 15 years with Big Show and Mark Henry, and myself being a longtime Big Show fan was hard because he was never allowed to win. And I remember with him and Mark Henry, I'm like, this will be okay, but it's not going to be great. And then him and Kane, I can remember when they were like tag team champions. I've also been a fan of those two big men. And I remember they kind of split them up. I remember watching that, and I believe with Tim. And he's like, so which one are you going to go for? I'm like, it doesn't matter. Neither of them are allowed to win. It's going to be like a double count out or a double DQ. It ended up being a no contest. It couldn't even be a double DQ. And so, stuff like that. When I saw Braun and Omos, I'm like, who's going to carry the match? These guys are very capable big men together. It was awful.
Yeah. That like style. I mean, go back even more to Kane and the Great Khali, if you remember that program, or Undertaker and Great Khali. You cannot just because you have two big guys in the ring. Yeah, it's a great looking visual, but the match execution is not. And even theatrically, you can't. There's not enough you can do to cover up the fact that maybe those set big men are not. They should be used more sparingly. I don't know. So.
Well, and then what are you going to do after that? You can't program these guys together yet, and I don't know.
I mean, you really want to kill a character. You really want to kill a character right out of the gate. I mean, just put him with another big man. That seems to work every time.
Yeah.
Let's go back further to Undertaker and Giant Gonzalez.
Yeah. Well, and like putting Omos with AJ Styles, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And even if you weren't, really interested in like the behind the scenes thing where you have a, 5-star veteran like AJ, and you can see this guy's 7'3", a real 7'3" or 7'4". He doesn't need to be put on a cinder block to be 7'4". Was great. Then they kind of went their own way. Putting him with MVP, I thought was also great. And then they brought Strowman back, who looked, man, just chiseled out of stone, man. He didn't need to be as cut as he is, but he did. Great for him. And then Strowman's like, here, I can't remember which event it was, and it's like, we're gonna go there. I'm like, no, this is not going to work. And I haven't seen Omos since. I'm not sure what he's doing now. And you have MVP warming back up to Bobby Lashley again. So,
yeah, which, Bobby is still not a great promo. He's an okay promo. He's not a great promo. In MVP is a great promo. So that would, again, I know why the pairing of him and Omos were together, MVP and Omos. I also know that, again, MVP is being paired. That Hurt Business is all guys that are extraordinarily talented in the ring but cannot talk. So
yeah, Shelton Benjamin came back.
Rich Swann, right, is the other. Rich Swann's the other guy, and Yeah, they're okay talkers. They're not great talkers. So having MVP with them is fantastic. And plus, I like seeing another manager that's not Paul Heyman.
Yeah.
Paul can only do so much, but
Yeah. Yeah, I think MVP could do for them exactly what Paul has been able to do for Brock, Roman, who both of those guys have become pretty good on the mic.
right.
In Roman's case, he's like a whole new man.
And going back quickly to Omos, him being paired with AJ Styles was the Diesel for and Shawn Michaels formula, where pair him with somebody who's that awesome in the ring. Maybe he won't learn all of AJ's moves. I mean, physically, he can't do all those moves. However, he can, just like how Kevin Nash did, you're being paired with one of the greatest in-ring workers, Shawn being Diesel's guy and AJ being Omos's guy.
Yeah.
You can learn how to piece a good match together using your limitations, which is what Kevin Nash did. And I thought that was going to be the formula with Omos, but apparently they were like, nope, scrapping that. We're going the big man route, and we're going to stick MVP with him, have him talk. So that was that didn't get the mileage, is what I'm saying. Him and AJ, it should have, but it didn't. So
I know. The only other dreams I'd like to see come true are Keith Lee coming back, and William Regal coming back. Like, I know I always talk about this with Tim. I've got my Keith Lee bath towel, shirt, glasses. I have a Keith Lee keychain. I gobbled up everything they had on WWE Shop. And then he disappeared. Otis, Omos. They got some big man fine tuning, I guess, to help them along. And then, brought him back as Bearcat Lee, and then he was just gone. Keith Lee was the first new favorite wrestler I've had. I mean, since like the Ruthless Aggression era, to where I'm introduced to somebody. All of my lifelong favorites are long retired. It's like, this guy is great. I want to get behind him, and then he was just gone. Yeah.
a guy I really like right now. Well, two guys. I like Kevin Owens, who I've followed for years. I've probably followed Kevin Owens probably for the better part of 17 years at least. From his indie days to his Ring of Honor days, all the way up to NXT and WWE. I've always enjoyed Kevin Owens' work, and he's always been consistently good, not only on the mic, but he's always been good in the ring. Not the greatest shape in the world, but you don't have to. He
No.
he reminds me of a Bam Bam Bigelow, where he is a super heavyweight kind of guy who can just do a lot of cool stuff in the ring and pull out a lot of cool surprises every once in a while.
Agreed.
And to make you think, oh man, this guy's not only a big dude, but he's also agile and athletic, deceptively.
Great on the stick too. I mean, really entertaining.
Yeah, that's where he's got one up on Bam Bam for me. Is he's way better on the stick. Other guy I really like, and I think I see a lot of, and it wasn't just Vince cramming his 2 cents down everyone's throat. Austin Theory, I like a lot. I think he's going to be a future player in the game. I think time will tell on him, and he'd have to stay healthy, of course, and but so far he's been given ball after ball, no matter what, and has lost humbly and has won humbly also. And he's made a lot of bad situations really good, and his work is great in the ring. I like watching him currently. And he's going to be a next can't miss star if he isn't already. So
completely agree. All right. So we covered the first decade of Raw, the Monday Night Wars. Kind of looked at the 30th anniversary from last night and kind of, put our toe in the current pool of WWE, which is in a, I mean, Vince left and came back. That in itself is unheard of and is historically significant. But any last thoughts on Raw, the Monday Night Wars, or the anniversary show?
My thoughts on Raw are the same thoughts I've always had, where it's just provided nothing but memory after memory for me. And, Raw's been great. Raw's been horrible. Raw's been in between, but Raw is an institution at this point. It's like The Simpsons. It's like All in the Family. It is one of those shows that's just going to be on the air. I think far beyond our time. Unless these new quote unquote potential buyers see it differently. But it is an institution on television. It would be a travesty for it to be pulled away. My thoughts on the Raw 30th anniversary show. I would say Legends. Yeah, the Legends segments were some were great to see, others were cringe. I love the and the new crop of talent that they have. I love the fact that again, you have your Austin Theory in the main event with Bobby Lashley. With Brock coming back. Man, that I wish the match could have seen itself through a little bit more, but just like I wish the cage match did, but for all intents and purposes, I think it was a good show. I don't think it was a great show. So that's my thoughts on Raw 30th. However, I like the fact that they've come this far with Raw, and we can have a 30th anniversary.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like you said,
the thing with WWE is, yeah, maybe they may not, and I've seen this with WrestleManias. They may not be the greatest, but goddamn, the production's good, and they can always make up for it the next event or the next year or whatever. They have chances upon chances to redeem themselves with me all the time. So
yeah, and it's an episodic show, like a soap opera. All My Children's been on like 50 years. Raw is at 30, and I think it has a lot more in common with General Hospital or All My Children than maybe like The Ultimate Fighter. But it's been a part of my childhood, my adulthood, everything that I fell in love with as a kid and have enjoyed as an adult is tied to those couple hours every week on Monday.
Yeah, and it's great to tune in. Like I said, I mean, it's just nice to see something on the air that long and have that long-lasting effect. I mean, we've pretty much seen it all, in terms of this 30th anniversary thing playing itself out, as well as us going from 11, 12-year-old kids to now being, in our early 40s. So it's
we're still talking about it.
We're still talking about it. It's still here. So yeah, this is a great time.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Tony.
Absolutely.